Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the potential Liberal Democrat revival is going to be one of the big themes of this election. Can they start to turn around those disastrous results from 2015 by winning around voters who don't like the look of Theresa May's Brexit plans? Well, if it's going to work, they're going to have to win constituencies like Bath. So I went to the city this week to see what the voters there are thinking. The historic city of Bath in the West Country, a World Heritage Site internationally famous for the hot springs that provided its name. Today, Bath, who voted Remain in the referendum, is set to be one of the most hotly contested seats in June's general election. After crunching the numbers, Bath looks like the perfect Lib Dem target seat. They'd only need 5% of Conservative voters to switch in order to win here. And the city has a history of turning yellow. Before 2015, it had a Lib Dem MP for 13 years. Received wisdom is that this election is solely about Brexit, but I was constantly reminded of the danger of overlooking the importance of local issues.
We've actually got an MP that has worked for Bath and put Bath first.
Do you think the Lib Dems have got a chance?
No.
Although the question of our relationship with Europe was never far away, and it's here that the Lib Dems could be set to make inroads.
I've always kind of supported them, but I think they're the only party who seem to be making sense for me on what is a very serious issue.
Both here and nationally, the youth vote could be all important. So I came to this student haunt to see if I could get any clearer sense of how this constituency might vote if the under-25s mobilise.
I'm interested to see what Tim Farron comes up with and what he suggests, really.
Yeah. And who have you backed before, if you don't mind me asking?
I've backed Labour before mainly, but I'm just a little bit nervous about Jeremy Corbyn's stance within the leadership of the Labour Party at the moment.
So you think maybe the Lib Dems are the people who can influence Brexit?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And also with tactical voting now taking a massive part in what young people are deciding on as well, I think more so Lib Dems may take the lead.
Because I suppose in this constituency in Bath, it's the Lib Dems who have got the best chance of defeating the Conservatives.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a couple more votes for them and the Tories are out.
And how are you planning on voting?
I think I'll vote Conservative. Pretty sure I'll vote Conservative. I know obviously Bath's typically Conservative region anyway, but I tend to vote Conservative anyway.
Not much clearer there then. And from the Conservative candidate, a refusal to be anything other than resolutely on message. Now, Bath voted for Remain in the EU referendum. You voted for Remain too, but since then you voted in favour of Article 50. So do you think there's some voters in Bath will feel let down by your stance on Brexit?
I think we have to deliver the strong and stable government that our constituents need us desperately to deliver, as well as what our country desperately needs. And the only person to deliver that, in my mind, is Theresa May, and I'm hearing that on every single doorstep I go and knock on.
The immediate obstacle that the Lib Dems here have to overcome is the lack of a local candidate. But once that's resolved, they believe that they are in with a chance to win back this seat.
We're very optimistic about the future. We have had over 150 activists and volunteers over the past 4 days, we're breaking record numbers in the amount of people coming through my office door. The amount of people we've had helping in the recent by-election where we got 48% of the vote and the Tories coming third is only buoying in our spirits and weighing really heavily on the Tories throughout the city. So yeah, we're hopeful, but the only time we'll know is on June the 9th.
Bath, Remain at the referendum and with a history of liberalism, is the perfect target seat for the Lib Dems, provided they can sort out who's going to stand. If the much vaunted fight back is to have any chance of succeeding, then they need to get organised and fast. Well, we wanted to discuss the issues raised in that piece with a Liberal Democrat and a Conservative MP, but although the Lib Dems were keen, no senior Conservatives were made available to speak to us this week. But if you're missing out on your dose of strength and stability, well, rest assured, I'm sure there'll be plenty to come over the course of that campaign.
Now, this election was supposed to be the Lib Dems' great opportunity to rise from the dead and speak for the millions who voted to remain inside the EU. Instead, and rather bizarrely, Tim Farron's opening days were sidetracked by a row over whether or not, as a committed Christian, he believed gay sex was a sin. So, can he recover? Well, Tim Farron joins me now.
Morning, Andrew.
Before we turn to that issue, good morning, Tim. There's a slight air of unreality hanging over your campaign at the moment, because you have said, I want to be leader of the opposition, and you have said this is the chance for the British people to change the course of the country with regard to Brexit. Given the number of MPs you've got and your realistic opportunities, that's going it a bit, isn't it?
Well, look, nobody can affect the result of the last general election. We can hopefully affect the result of the one that's coming. And let's not pretend the Prime Minister has chosen this election for any other reason than a cold, calculated desire to do what is right for the Conservative Party, not for the country. So she expects some kind of coronation. What's blindingly obvious is that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are obsessed with fighting amongst themselves. There is a vacancy for the leader of the opposition. And I say, given this is a historic moment for Britain, whether we choose to go over the cliff edge of a hard Brexit or whether we choose to let the people decide on the terms of the deal, the Liberal Democrats put ourselves in a position where we will say we will be the opposition, the strong opposition, that Britain desperately needs.
I want to come on to the reality of how many seats you might get and so forth later on, but you have had a very, very difficult first week over the whole gay sex issue, and it wasn't the big problem with this that the very voters you most need to win over, young, liberal-minded, Europhile voters, are the ones most worried about your position.
Well, I wouldn't have chosen to spend, some of the first week talking about my personal faith, but you can't affect what people choose to ask you. What I do choose to do is say to the British people, this is the biggest choice we face in a generation. We have this enormous issue about whether we leave the single market, whether we go for a hard Brexit, whether we are forced to accept a deal that will affect all of us for generations, and yet we have a Labour Party that has held Theresa May's hand as they jumped off the cliff edge to a hard Brexit. And this is an important moment. So for young people, people who voted Remain, but also those people who voted Leave and think, nevertheless, the Prime Minister is taking us in a wrong direction. The Liberal Democrats are offering you the chance to change the future of this country.
Do you accept that the gay sex row deflected your message in a crucial part of the campaign, and they're the same voters who are also very, very worried about the tuition fees? They remember the tuition fees promise, and they're still angry about that.
Well, then they'll remember that I was one of the largest number of Liberal Democrats who voted against the tuition fee. Right.
So the question is, are you going to change the policy?
But I also take the view that we are looking at something that is going to cast Britain's future for 20, 30, 40 years. So you're right in many ways to focus on young voters. They'll be the ones living with the consequences of the deal that we don't know the outcome of yet. I mean, this week we've seen...
So on tuition fees, are you going to change the policy?
Well, we want it to be a fairer system. We believe that fees and indeed what one pays back afterwards should reflect your ability to pay. We got a better deal from the Tories than they were going to give us on our own. But the real issue here is how do you produce and provide for young people, for all people, a future that is brighter than the one we're currently going to get. At the moment, the Prime Minister has chosen to have a general election on her terms because she assumes an enormous majority. And around the country, there are very few people, I think, including myself, who expect anything other than Theresa May to be in 10 Downing Street on the 9th of June. And the question is, will she be properly opposed? It cannot be by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party.
This, because you have said also that you wouldn't do a coalition deal either with Theresa May or with Jeremy Corbyn. Now, if you want to affect the way the government behaves after this election when it comes to Brexit, you want maximum leverage, and you seem to be saying, yeah, but I'm going to throw away any possible lever I might have, however well I do.
I think the most important thing for a leader is clarity. Clarity, number one, is to be honest with you and everybody else. We all know it's the truth that the Prime Minister is heading for a colossal coronation on the 8th of June. Clarity point number two, so let's not pretend there's going to be any hung parliament anyway.
A colossal coronation?
That's how it looks to me. And she expects the British people to turn up in their Sunday best and to wave the flag. That is not how a democracy works, and we're determined to turn the coronation she expects into a contest that Britain desperately needs. The second reason we've been very clear that we will not be having a coalition with Labour or the Tories is because I want people to look at the Liberal Democrats and realise when they vote for us, they're not voting for us as a proxy for anything else. They're voting for the Liberal Democrats' plan to invest in health and social care, to invest in education, and to make sure that Britain does not head off the cliff edge of a hard Brexit, that the British people have the final say, not the politicians.
You sound to me that at the beginning of this campaign you have in effect given up. It's all Theresa May's. We might as well walk away and
well,
pick
we're the
up
only
our
people
business
not
afterwards.
walking away. So Jeremy Corbyn appears to be fighting the next Labour leadership election. The Labour Party are fighting amongst themselves and have given up on the job of opposing the government. Britain desperately needs a strong, decent opposition for the sake of democracy. You don't need to agree with me on everything to agree with me that Britain needs a strong opposition, and the Liberal Democrats are determined to provide it.
Now, if you want to be leader of that opposition, then you need to go from 8 seats to, what, 130 seats, 100... I mean, it would be the biggest change in the Liberal Democrats' fortunes in living memory. Not living memory, in memory of any kind. Historians would be struggling to find any parallel. And a lot of people listening to what you say about the coronation and looking at the polls and say, this is a complete fantasy. Tim Farron might want to believe it briefly, as he's shaving first thing in the morning, but nobody else will.
Well, I mean, I think I'm probably one of those self-aware politicians. I'm aware of all the things that you say. I'm also aware that a week ago, the two main parties in France came third and fifth. These are times when politics in the Western Hemisphere, at least, has never been more unpredictable. This is also an election that Theresa May has chosen not to get a mandate. She doesn't need a mandate, and how can you have a mandate on something that's not been written yet anyway?
Right.
The deal, but it is an election nonetheless that could absolutely change the course of British political history. If you cannot be ambitious at this point to allow those millions of people who are appalled by the direction the Prime Minister is taking us in, not just out of Europe, but out of the single market, without the British people having the final say, if you want to prevent the calamity of that hard Brexit, you have one option. It is the Liberal Democrats, and you need to take it.
And to get to those seats, you need lots and lots of metropolitan and university towns, all those seats which voted Remain last time. But you also need to clean up a lot of seats in the southwest. But the southwest is exactly the part of the country that voted for Brexit. I can remember an old Liberal tradition when the old Liberals in the southwest were very Eurosceptic, they were right of centre, and that tradition has more or less died in your party.
Well, I don't want to go on a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but you will remember that I resigned from the Liberal Democrat front bench about 10 years ago because I am a bit of a Eurosceptic. I'm somebody who challenges people in power, the EU, in government, in councils, but I'm somebody who believes that Britain is better off in the European Union. And what the southwest is famous for is wanting to be able to be self-governing, to be independent, to be different from those in Westminster who tell them what to do. And the worst thing for the West Country is to be a blanket of blue where the Tories just take you for granted. And that's the thing. I think people around the country are beginning to realise that a Conservative majority is now not in question, but a Conservative landslide means they will take you for granted wherever you live.
So you're looking for an extraordinary change in the politics of this country. We read today that you've been talking to Tony Blair about this. Can you tell us anything about the conversation and whether there is some prospect, from your point of view, of a major realignment after this election?
Well, I mean, several months ago I met with Tony Blair at his request. I thought it was only courteous to do so. I have many very, very clearly on the record disagreements with Tony Blair, not least over the illegal and counterproductive war in Iraq. But I do admire Tony Blair for one thing in particular, and that is his ability to put together a small C coalition that was able to win a general election and defeat the Conservatives in 1997. I admire progressives, and he is broadly, I guess, a progressive. I admire progressives who are able to win elections, because if you cannot win, then you cannot change people's lives. The NHS is in danger as long as progressives cannot win, and that's why it's important that we do.
Can I come back to my original question, which is, do you see, therefore, beyond this election, some major realignment in British politics?
Well, I'm focusing on this election, and let's remember where the progressive forces are at the moment, if you want to call them that. Everybody knows that the SNP can only gain one seat off the Tories. That's all they've got mathematically available to them, unless there is an aggressive foreign policy coming from Nicola Sturgeon soon. I wouldn't write it out, but that's where things are. One gain possible. Everybody accepts, Labour are going backwards, not forwards. So the only flank through which Theresa May is remotely vulnerable and where progressives have any chance of defeating Conservatives is the Liberal Democrats. Right. Yes, in the West Country, in my part of the world, in the North West, here in London, if you want a strong opposition, the Liberal Democrats are now your only choice.
OK, pity you couldn't find a seat for Rachel Johnson.
Well, Rachel's a fantastic addition to the team. We picked the right sibling, or rather she picked us, and it's an absolute blessing to us to have somebody.
Would you like to see her stand as London Mayor in the Liberal Democrat cause in due course?
I'm sure she'd be marvellous at it, but shall I say that's an election for, 3 years down the road, and we'll worry about that after the one we're currently fighting.
Plenty of time to talk in due course. Tim Farron, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
I've been getting away with it all